Hey pumpkins! So we're going to talk about a sensitive topic today, which is the ethics of cursing. This is going to probably be a rather long video, but I guarantee you it's going to be worth it. So I'm going to talk a lot about the history of religion in this, and this will include some remarks which some may find disparaging about the history of Christianity. This is not to in any way disparage or insult or drag modern Christians. If you are Christian, you are welcome on my channel. Everyone is welcome as long as they're not dicks. That's always been the rule of this channel and will continue to be so. So I want to get into this, and we're going to get into like history and philosophy and religion and all of these big stuff. We're even going to talk about the weather and the government. So we're hitting all the big ones. Okay, so first of all, I almost never pay attention to trolls. Now, I don't consider anyone who's critical of me to be trollish, because you are allowed your opinion as long as you're not a dick. When you start being a dick, then you're a troll. I had a woman demand that I put trigger warnings on all of my videos that I practice black magic, because she was Indigenous Australian, and therefore if any other Indigenous Australian watched my channel, they should be aware that I practice black magic. And I refused to, because the very notion of magic being either black or white and acknowledging that is against the fabric of my religions and what I stand for. So no, that's not going to happen. In the end, this woman put some, disparage. I actually left the comments up so you can see what kind of a person she is, and she may end up finding herself in a jar if she responds to this video in disparaging ways. But I did get a lot of flack for the sour jar video that I did on Without a Crystal Ball. And I wanted to discuss why that happened, and why I felt the need to do that, and why that was an ethical choice of me to do. I first want to get out of the way the idea of the threefold law, or the tenfold law, or the millionfold law, or whatever you want to call it. That's a Wiccan principle. I'm not Wiccan, and if you are Wiccan, you are welcome here, but I have my own issues with Wicca. I have far more issues with the history of Christianity, but Wicca is a very, I don't even want to call it a new tradition. We'll get into that at some point of why I'm not Wiccan, but Wiccans are welcome here too. But threefold law, I don't agree with. I think that there are always consequences to your actions, and there's also going to be a video coming at some point about karma and what karma is and what karma isn't. If you were to look at what karma is as being a ledger of good and bad stuff, I want you to take a look at what you know about who I am and the things that I've done. So if you're going to putting someone in a sour jar as bad, or yelling at somebody and telling them to say my name after they lie a week after meeting me that they know me, or a week after, 6 emails with me that they even know who I am, I got too upset about that. Yeah, I let it slide. So if those are things that go in the bad column, and then you look at the things that I also have done, like a fundraiser for women who have been victims of online bullying and who have had mental health crises. I've done fundraisers for knitting for the homeless. I've donated to planting a tree when I had 2,000 subscribers. I've offered my womb to a friend of mine who's having fertility issues. So if you want to look at like the good stuff that I've done and look at the bad stuff that I've done, I think that the good stuff outweighs that. So does the sour jar cancel out my sweet jar in terms of the stuff that happens to me? Or, am I maybe responsible for my own life and my own decisions? I would like to think that I'm responsible. But I reject, and as do most who follow a druid path and a chaos magic path, of ideas of dichotomies, of something is one or the other, is black or is white, or is up or down. For us, the sacred is the in-between, things that are both and neither. So if you look at the sacred places for druids, it's stuff that are like what we call liminal spaces. So things that are Shorelines would be a great idea, that it's neither the ocean nor land, it's the shore and it's both, and at the same time neither. And the edges of forests, because there's usually like a trailing off and it's a gradient. So we don't look at things in terms of black and white, we look at things in terms of green and gray. Even our sacred times of day are often twilight, it's dusk and dawn, so when it's neither night or daytime, but it's both and neither. So this is really an important part of understanding my own philosophy. I said I was going to discuss a bit of the history of Christianity here, and we're also going to be discussing the plight of those who were taken from their land and forced to work for free under terrible conditions. Apparently after like I get to 8 or 10 minutes, the bots stop watching for these little teeny tiny words and I can say what I want to say. But at this point, yeah, I gotta watch what I say in the early parts of my videos, because you know, I do try to get monetized, but that's not why I do this. Anyways, so the roots of Christianity can be traced of this idea of either or, one or the other, black and white. So this idea of dichotomy, you can trace back to religions that inspired Christianity. So for instance, Zoroastrianism was very much based on light and dark, one or the other. You can see traces of that also in ancient Egyptian religions, where you have this battle between night and day, between Horus and Set, or Ra and Set, whichever. I'm not super familiar with Egyptian mythology, but you can see that there's this night and day battle, and the words for sun Set comes from the god Set, who was the god of the night and was, you know, the evil god, and he would be defeated every morning, and then he would defeat the god of the sun at night, and so sun Set was Set, you know, taking over the sun. Although, you know, there are different, you know, languages certainly that have different words, but that's where the English word for that comes from. So there's this history that comes from places in the Middle East of dichotomies, and if you look at some aspects of modern day Christianity, you can see that. Plato is also another, which, you know, Greece is close to the Middle East. You have a lot of issues of dichotomies, and something is either light or dark, heaven or hell. You even look at modern politics, and it's Republican, Democrat, gay, straight, man, woman, and there's this one is better than the other, and one is different from the other, and you never ever have any in between. And what Celtic traditions are more likely to look at, and these are pre-Christian Celtic traditions, is gradients, and that there really isn't a line that we think they are. Now, we think of men and women as being binary, but science has shown us that these are not one or the other, and that there are many layers and gradients, and we have many biological and psychological and hormonal differences and chromosomal differences between these two endpoints. So to call something black or white is to completely negate what I believe and what my traditions are. So this is why I don't tell people that if you are different than me, then you are toast and, you know, get off my channel and whatnot, because I believe that it's the converse. So you have what's called antithesis, which is the opposite, like two opposites, and then you have the thesis, which is the same, and then you have synthesis, which is the combining of the two. And I believe that there is incredible beauty in combining those two. And how do we combine those two? We do so with language, and we do so with discourse and conversation. So I want to encourage that. I want to encourage people who watch my channel to see things differently and not just automatically put something in an either-or category. You see this with a lot in the Iraqi war, with George W. Bush saying you're either for us or you're against us, and there's no room for middle ground ever. Now, that's not to say that I never have an opinion, because there are times that I am very opinionated and can be very much a steamroller in my opinion, but those are things that I actively work on to try to understand and have compassion. One thing about being autistic is that I see things in terms of systems, and when you see things in terms of systems, it can be very difficult to see the human nuance. And I am definitely not someone who is an empath, because I am neurologically incapable of doing that as instinct, so I need to force myself to see the human side of things. And yeah, Mike's a little closer to me though, I hope that helps. To not see things as dichotomies. So there is no known or found at this point, archaeology may find something in the future, original version of the Bible. So the printing press wasn't discovered until medieval times. I'm not sure when, I think 1400s was that when Gutenberg invented the Gutenberg press, about then. So you have a long history of handwritten documents being rehandwritten and retranslated. And so the earliest documents that we have that were handwritten and translated and sometimes passed through oral traditions, then translated and written down, were, they're probably about 300 to 500 Common Era. And there are several of these documents, and not all of them match up. So there are differences within the Bible of what different, and even in modern day, there are different versions of the Bible. I remember, for instance, like you've got the King James, and you've got the New International Version, and you've got all these different versions of the Bible that are the favorites of some people, one or another. I'm not sure. I can Google the date of the King James Bible, but I mean, I think we're looking at the early modern era, so 1600s, 1700s for the King James. It is important to note the King James Bible is making a big resurgence in many fundamental communities, and especially the new fundamental independent Baptists, which are like the Steve Andersons of the world, and they believe that homosexuals should be given capital punishment. And it's interesting to note that they are such big proponents of the King James Bible, because King James, who ordered the translation of this, was himself a homosexual, and that's well known in history. So anyway, we have again, I could Google, I should have written it down first, about 300 AD, or 300 Common Era, I should say, that's the correct term now. We have something called the Council of Nicaea, which was a political movement by Emperor Constantine in Rome, and there was a big meeting in Nicaea, and they all sat around a table and decided what books should and shouldn't be in what they considered the Bible. There were some books that made it that were quite popular, the Gospels of the big four, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, and then you have some Gospels that were removed. So for instance, there was a Gospel of Mary Magdalene. However, the Romans were a quite patriarchal and toxic masculine society, so they didn't want a book of Mary Magdalene making it into the Bible and having a woman have a voice in what was to be the new religion. Constantine was not a Christian. He was not the first Christian empire, but a political decision was made to make Christianity the legal religion of the Roman Empire, because of politics, because that was going to be the best way for them to go as far as they're concerned, and most in line with their manifest destiny of colonialism, which we see to this day, the effects of that Council of Nicaea. So Mary Magdalene was also not a prostitute, but she was made a prostitute because that was an unsavory profession in ancient Rome, and they wanted to discredit this woman, and who was probably the wife of Jesus. Not getting into conspiracy theories or anything, but I mean, most likely Jesus was a married man. And if you're going to give any, I don't recommend the whole Da Vinci Code, Dan Brown, that's not where I would go with this. I would go with L'Homme de Quête, and another book, I can't remember the author's name, called The Accidental Christ. And it talks about how, there's no way that Jesus wouldn't have been, or Yeshua ben Yosef was his name, was not a married man. Like, there's no way he wasn't. And if you were going to give him a wife, it would have been Mary Magdalene. So no, she was not a prostitute. She was made one as a political decision to disparage women. Because again, we have this dichotomy. You're a man, you're a woman, you're one or the other, you're good, you're bad, you're evil, you're holy and righteous. So that, and the Book of Thomas was also removed from the Bible in the Council of Nicaea. The Book of Thomas talked about Jesus as being a Gnostic, and they didn't like the Gnostics, so they removed that. The Book of Judas was also removed because Judas made God look like the bad guy. Judas was Jesus' best friend, and he was not evil, and he was not a betrayer, but they wanted to paint him in that light because they wanted to discredit that book. So in that, and then again you have translations upon translations and rewritings of that until you have the printing press. And even then there were different translations. So one very tragic translation was going from Aramaic to Greek to English. So the original Aramaic word for apothecarian, so like a pharmacist, was similar to the word for poisoner. So if you poison someone, then that is a really sneaky way to kill someone. And in a translation from Aramaic to Greek, that the word poisoner ended up being translated to sorcerer. And then when you translate it to English, it ends up being Exodus 22:18 of "Thou shalt not suffer a witch to live." And during the early modern times, you have the number has been greatly exaggerated, but most likely you're looking at about 10,000 people in Europe between 1550 and 1700, 80% of those being women who were tried and very unfairly and convicted of heresy and sentenced to death, often by hanging. No, they didn't often burn witches, they hung them. So, and most of these women were pious Christian folks. Some of them may have been widows who, owned land and somebody wanted their land, or they made their living as a midwife, and which doctors, because there was this dichotomy between men and women, doctors learned about anatomy and about health through the battlefield. So they considered women's medicine to be like icky, so they wouldn't deliver babies, and delivering babies was very dangerous in those days. Something like 1 in 5 babies died in birth, and so like a 20% infant mortality rate. And now with modern medicine, we have that as like nothing. So when people are like, oh, women have been giving birth for thousands of years, and yes, and we also had a mortality rate of women giving birth for thousands of years, not in hospitals, that was incredibly high. And we had a maternal mortality rate of 1 in 10, so now those numbers are much lower because we have doctors giving birth. But anyway, so these midwives, they were said to have caused the death of the infants, and were accused of selling these babies to Satan and sacrificing them and all these awful things. Some of these people were mentally ill and were sentenced to death. And so you have 10,000, roughly, innocent, most 80% women, who were sentenced to death because of a misprint, because of a mistranslation from Aramaic to Greek to English. So I think that there is wisdom in the Bible. I think that there, especially like the book of Psalms, the book of Proverbs, I think that there are pearls of wisdom to be found. But I think that if you look at, I discourage the interpretation of the Bible as infallible, because we know that there were things that were added and taken out. And one modern example is the book of Mark. So there's a passage that's added in some texts of the book of Mark, specifically in very charismatic and fundamentalist churches that talks about the handling of snakes and the speaking in tongues and all of that stuff. Whereas 300 years ago, that was not seen in the Bible at all. So we know that somewhere in the past 300 years, that part about speaking in tongues and handling snakes was added. And now some copies of the Bible are removing that again in an attempt to make it more pure. So how many people have died because of venomous snake bites, because of snake handling, because of something that was added to the Bible only 300 years ago? These are things that are important to note. So, yeah, the idea of talking about things in, as the Bible says, is right or wrong, is sometimes determined by men and not by God, though I think that there could be some inspiration. The book of the Song of Solomon is that's like, that's bordering on 50 Shades of Grey. Like, that's some racy stuff. Drinking wine out of the woman's belly button. It was not her belly button that they were drinking out of. Just, you can see where that's going. So, important history to note. So that whole idea of dichotomy also showed itself in, not so long ago, and still shows itself in terms of race. And where you have the black and white dichotomy. And this led to a justification, because if you're going to have everything split down the middle, where one is bad and one is good, it ends up being the people who have the guns and the firepower and the idea of colonialism, who happen to have lighter skin, end up calling themselves the good, and then dehumanizing those who have darker skin color and who are, maybe not so interested in taking over the entire globe. So, then you end up having the slave trade, which, oh my God, so awful. But there are places in the Bible, especially in the Old Testament, where slavery was encouraged. These are the times that I can feel my heart, and I've mentioned, and I'm not trying to be like, I got a black daughter, I'm not racist, or things like that, or using my daughter as tokenism, but I do understand that my daughter's father, this is his family history. This isn't just like some unremoved thing. So, entertain for the notion, for the moment, that there might be an agenda to some of the Bible that was added in to protect people who are of the majority. Now, I think that Jesus was a real man. I think that he was probably a pretty cool dude. It wasn't until the Council of Nicaea that he was written in as being the Son of God. At that point, there were, some people who believed he was the Son of God, some people who believed he was a prophet, and it was that meeting that a bunch of Romans sat down, including Emperor Constantine, and they decided that they were going to make Jesus the Son of God. So would Christianity as itself be a religion today, if not for that meeting? Certainly not, and the Bible certainly would not be what it is today. There were things that were written in the Bible and excluded from the Bible to support these dichotomies, so of women being less and women not being allowed to speak in the church. And that wasn't Jesus who said that. That was the Apostle Paul, who never even met Jesus. That women aren't allowed to speak in the church, and that women should be submissive to men. And I think that's probably, if the Bible was a perfect document but still had the thing of women have to be submissive to men, that is enough for me to not be a Christian. That's my personal opinion. Like I said, if you're a Christian, you're welcome here. I come from a religion that historically did have some patriarch in there. It was not as equal as some modern people would like to believe, but certainly Boudica was allowed to lead tribes, allowed to lead her tribe, whereas a Roman would not. She would have to manipulate men to lead. You have female goddesses who are prized and worshipped, and though there may have been individual tribes that worship like one goddess, historically there was never ever the great goddess of a matriarchal monotheism. That just historically wasn't a thing. That came about kind of Victorian ages with the work of God, what was he wrote a book called The Great Goddess, or The White Goddess, and I can find, I have issues with that book too, so there's another video that I'll do. But anyway, yeah, so I'm from, I am a part of a tradition trying to revive these pre-Christian ideas that were pretty well wiped almost out of existence, and then are being reconstructed through writings, and unfortunately some through the writings of conquerors like Caesar, and conquerors like Claudius and Nero, and I don't know how much Nero wrote. He was probably too busy playing his lyre, but that's another story. So we look at that there are biblical passages that supported slavery. There have always been, magic has always been a way for oppressed people to gain power. I shouldn't say always, until about Victorian times, and then in Victorian times you have this whole spiritualism movement, and you had John Dee, who was an astrologer and psychic to the Queen, and he had his own issues, and you started to see like seances being a wealthy thing, but for the most part throughout history, this was something of the poor, this was something of the oppressed to gain power. And specifically of you're looking at slavery, many of the African slaves wanted to maintain their own religion, which when it came to North America ended up being called voodoo. So voodoo is an African traditional religion. It had other names when it was in Africa, but it came to be known as voodoo, in especially places like New Orleans and Haiti. Hoodoo is something that is different than voodoo. So hoodoo is the, often some of the magical practices, or laying tricks, or root working. But root working itself is something different. There's a whole, this is like, 20 videos that I could make on this subject. But, so we're just going to say that hoodoo and voodoo are two different things, and that voodoo is an African traditional religion. And, of course, slavery is non-consensual. That's why it's slavery. And to attempt freedom, or to, get some of the more horrible masters under control, this is when magic would come into play, because there was no other option. So this is why you have a dichotomy between black and white magic, and this isn't about one being evil and one being good necessarily, but this is about the skin color of the people who practiced it. So this is why I will never call magic black or white magic, because that is insinuating that something that is black magic is evil and therefore practiced by people of color, and white magic is therefore love and light and practiced by white people. So we're just going to take black and white magic out of this. The woman who was commenting that I demanding that I make content warnings, so I don't actually call warnings trigger warnings, I call them content warnings. There's actually another video coming at some point about the difference between a trigger and a content warning, and what is offensive and what is triggering, and what is annoying and what is triggering. So that video is coming at some point. Excuse me, I'm getting thirsty. Okay. So it's important to note that curses and blesses are the same thing, because when you're blessing something, you are also cursing something. If you are attempting to only do what you refer to as white magic, or positive magic, or love and light, please Google who the archangel of light was, or the bringer of light, before you ever say love and light to me again, because that's not where I go. Thank you. Spoiler alert, the angel of light, or the bringer of light, is Lucifer. So when you say love and light to someone, you're actually wishing the devil on them. So yeah, can we stop with that dichotomy, please? Thank you very much. Okay. So, if you, let's say, were doing something that you look at being completely unproblematic or completely harmful, and this would go to whether you're doing magic or you're doing a prayer, that you want to get a job, that's great. If, we live in a society where we need to work, and so if you're doing a ritual to get a job, and it is successful, or you pray to get a job and it is successful, and you wouldn't have got that job otherwise without praying or saying that ritual, that means that somebody else didn't get that job. So yes, you are doing a blessing for yourself, but you have now cursed that person who didn't get the job. And maybe they were counting on that job. Maybe they were just in the final recruiting stage and they were already starting to budget and plan for what they would do with that money, and maybe they told their spouse that everything was going to be okay now, that you can pay for those braces and you're going to have benefits, and they didn't get that job. Would that then mean, like, what happens to that family? Does that person who didn't get the job then, possibly end their life, and then their children are now forced to grow up without a parent, and you widowed their spouse, and all that happened because you got a new job. And part of doing magic is taking responsibility that anything that happens as a consequence is on you and caused by you, and you are the one who did that. I did that sour jar, but I also did a sweetening jar, and who was that sweetening jar for is my sister. My sister, who was angry at me, and I haven't reached out to her since that. I did write her a letter on her birthday. I need to actually call her, I know. But anyway, it is my sister's will to be mad at me forever, and I know my family and my sisters and I all can carry grudges until the day we die. I miss my sister, I love my sister, so even though I am doing a jar magic to repair the relationship and repair the love that my sister, who was my best friend, and I had, I am altering her will, which is, some people think is the biggest, no-no with magic, is altering the will of somebody. If you're doing a spell to get a job, you are altering the will of the person who's, doing the hiring. So all magic alters somebody's will. I mean, if you do magic to get a sale on tomatoes, then that's still, altering someone's will. And we do that whether we are talking or whether we are doing magic, because there is no difference between magic and mundane. So for me to go on a plane and fly to Minnesota during a global pandemic and knock on someone's door and punch them in the face, I can't do that. I don't want to, board a plane. I don't have the spare money for a vacation. If I'm going to go on vacation, I'm not going to Minnesota and in the winter, and punching someone in the face would, get me in more trouble. But somebody had to be stopped because they were victimizing people. They were hurting people. And myself, within my tradition, I am a warrior, and why wouldn't I step in when I see wrong? And I have a strong intolerance for injustice, and when I see something happening that is wrong, I feel compelled to act and to do something. So if I see that somebody has fallen down in the street, I don't laugh. I go over and I say, "Are you okay? Do you need a hand up?" When I see people suffering, I want to do everything in my power to make that suffering stop. And I think, I worked in palliative care for a number of years, in-home palliative care, where I stood at someone's bedside and watched them die. And who would ask, does that bother you to watch people die? And, in my aspect, because that bridge between life and death is so sacred, I was like a spiritual midwife in a way, and I didn't do anything to hasten their death. I simply would provide comfort measures and care for them in their last moments so their family could get sleep. It wasn't the death that bothered me, it was the suffering. And so most times with most Western medicine, we give them all the good stuff. And please, when I am suffering, give me all the good stuff. We were not concerned about things like addiction or things like, recovery when someone has, less than a week to live. They are suffering, we give them Dilaudid or morphine or whatever. And part of the program that I was in was to receive special training that I could, as a, again, what we call in Canada PSWs, or personal support workers, and in the US there's multiple names, from RNA or CMA or whatever, bum washers. So as the lowest rung of healthcare, I was able to, under a nurse's direction, administer narcotics to people who were suffering. So suffering bothers me. When I see suffering, it doesn't just bother me, like it's visceral, that I need to stop that suffering. So it's really, really hard for me to watch people suffer. I was seeing one person create so much suffering, and I felt like I had a duty to stop that suffering. And eventually, that person is going to be deplatformed and will not be able to hurt people anymore, right? And as you see, since I made that jar, that has been quite effective. It does bother me to see that perpetrator, that problematic YouTuber, continue to suffer herself, and there's times that I think that maybe this has gone too far, and then I'm like, no, she needs to, get off the platform. And then she will get out of the jar. So if there's no difference between the magical and the mundane, then doing this is no different than punching someone in the face. And I can't do that. So there's a duty for me to do something to protect people. Now, I am not judge, jury, and executioner. I am not a police officer, but if you think about, if a police officer needs to arrest someone and put them in jail, is that cursing them because they're doing something that person, and let's say this is I'm not going to get into police brutality or anything like that right now, but let's say this is a legitimate criminal and needs to be put in their place. Are we going to not act because that's negative against the criminal? Are we going to continue to allow that criminal to rob banks and do terrible things? Or are we going to say that, no, it's actually a good thing that the officer arrested them and put them in jail? Yes, there's due process. We're not getting into that. But sometimes you have to step in and do something that somebody might find negative to have that positive effect. And when I say that there's no difference between cursing and blessing, you might be blessing someone as well as cursing them. In fact, you're always blessing someone as well as cursing them. If you do something like a blessing for yourself to have better self-esteem, well, you are cursing the part of yourself that has low self-esteem. In fact, you're killing that part of yourself that has low self-esteem, or at least binding it. If you are doing a prayer to cure someone's cancer, that means that you are killing the cancer, which is, cells that are alive. So you're cursing the cancer while blessing the person. If you're a farmer and it's drought conditions and you do prayers or spells or rituals to make it rain and it's successful and it rains, well, yay, people got to eat now because your crops are going to survive because you're a farmer. But what about the microorganisms that were feasting on your dying crops? What about person who was getting married that day and thought, well, it never rains this weekend, and all of a sudden it's raining and their outdoor wedding has to be postponed or whatever? Yeah, they should have had backup plans, but either way, the backup plans were not what they wanted, not what they intended, so you've cursed somebody's wedding. Yeah, I know, it rains on a wedding day, it's supposed to be a lucky bride. But anyway, that's still, that has a negative effect on someone's life because you made it rain. So these are many examples on how blessing and cursing are the same thing. And if you are doing a blessing, you are doing a curse. And there's a common saying that if you can't curse, then you can't bless. And if you're trying to do the most positive magic possible and it is not working, it is because you don't realize how important cursing is to that process. So if you're trying to pray for somebody to get a job, but you are only positive things can happen, well, then that means that the person who is supposed to get that job is going to get that job as they were supposed to do, and the person you're praying for to get a job isn't going to get it. So magic is not either or, one or the other. It's both and neither at the same time, and part of a magical tradition is understanding that. So, as I said, the woman who was demanding that I label my videos as warning people that I practice black magic was an indigenous Australian woman, and she believes very much in the difference between black and white. But having that belief is the victim of colonialism, which she is unaware of. So although her tradition, and maybe her mother's, and maybe even her grandmother's tradition may have been influenced, I'll use that word because that's polite, influenced by Christianity, that doesn't mean that her ancestors before white prisoners arrived would have, before colonialism, would have recognized that difference between black and white, the same way that she is demanding that I put trigger warnings, not just content warnings. I do content warnings, I don't do trigger warnings. That I put trigger warnings on my videos that I practice black magic. Because saying that is not only a complete affront to everything that I believe in, but is also racist AF. So, that is my belief on the ethics of cursing. Now, if you are someone who goes around throwing curses at everything and everyone who ticks you off, if you start, wishing and cursing whoever cut you off in traffic with explosive diarrhea, yes, you are going to have bad consequences. You are going to have an angry persona, and you are going to have negative issues. Because magic is hard work, and cursing is hard work. When I have people come to me who are having problems in their life and, are saying, like, did someone curse me? And they're looking for a tarot reading to ask if they're cursed. It is very, 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 very rare that someone is actually cursed, because very, very, very few magicians have the power and the knowledge to properly curse someone. Which is why most people don't think that magic doesn't exist, because they don't know how to curse, so they don't know how to bless, so their magic sucks. So, yeah, it is far easier, and I think that when someone first gets into magic, they want to do everything by magic. And when someone first realizes that cursing is not bad, then they kind of want to curse everybody, and I have done some curses that I regret. An ex-boyfriend of mine, this was, actually an ex-fiance of mine, this is, going back 15 years or more, left me for another woman, and then she wrote me this letter that was like, we're so happy in bed, and screw you, and I cursed her pretty hard. And shortly after that, she was in an electronic wheelchair, and after a car accident, and so I am completely over that 15 years later, and I understand that was wrong, because that was too harsh. Maybe I should have given her explosive diarrhea in the Eaton Centre, which is Canada's biggest mall, or second, I don't know, is the Edmonton Mall bigger now? Whatever. Explosive diarrhea in a mall would have been better than altering her life, and I feel badly about that, and that was wrong. And I live and I learn, and stuff happens, so yeah, I take responsibility for that, and I don't know how to make that better. I don't know how I can make that better. So I've learned that it is far easier to just tell someone to fuck off than it is to curse someone. And so I'll leave it up on my, what video is that? My video, it was a few days ago on, gosh, I should have a look. I think it was one of my top favorite chaos magic authors. Oh no, it was on Seeing Color, why it's important to see color. Yeah, the lady started getting incredibly nasty and saying awful things, and there's a part of me that was like, bitch, you're going in a jar. And it is far easier for me to tell her to, kindly fuck herself than it is for me to care. And that's usually what I do with, trolls, is I delete their comment because they're being dicks, and I tell them to kindly fuck off. Or I just, mentally tell them to kindly fuck off, and I put them, I delete their comment. I don't, put everyone in a jar who pisses me off. But if someone is actively, with knowledge, hurting those I care about, then, or actively hurting people who don't deserve to be hurt, then I think that I have an obligation to step in. So, yeah, that is why there is no black magic and there is no white magic, and you will never ever see a trigger warning. You'll never see a trigger warning, period. You'll see lots of content warnings, but you will never see me differentiate between black magic and white magic, because that's just nonsense. I apologize if I called your tradition nonsense, but it's not something that I will take part in. Okay, so there is the ethics of cursing. and the ethics of blessing. From yours truly, Caroline Ironwill. If you have made it to the end of the video, thank you. I know that it was a long one, and I rambled a lot. But please do subscribe if you have not yet, because I do want to be giving away that beautiful shawl. I do have memberships available, and Tarot Tuesday will happen tomorrow at 3 p.m. Eastern Standard Time of some free readings, or although Super Chats get priority on those, and members get priority over those. So, yes, wear a mask, wash your hands, stay safe, and I will talk to you later. Bye, pumpkins.